Good day from Lexington, Kentucky. I'm Sean Sloan, Senior Policy Analyst at the Council of State Governments, and I staff the Workforce of Tomorrow subcommittee of CSG's Future of Work National Task Force. Unlike for our previous webinar interviews in this series, we're not at CSG headquarters today. Like many folks around the country, we are working from home as we record this on March 31st in the interest of social distancing and sheltering in place. I'm on my couch at home. My colleague Joel Sams from the CSG Communications team is elsewhere, and our guest is joining us via the magic of GoToWebinar today. One of the policy areas the Workforce of Tomorrow subcommittee has focused on is how state government and its partners can help to foster lifelong learning, something we know is going to be necessary for the workforce of tomorrow as they face a world of work that is increasingly dynamic and uncertain in the years ahead. The subcommittee is keenly interested in figuring out how to best support partnerships that allow students and workers to attain new competencies and credentials and master new skills over the course of their lives and careers. In addition, the subcommittee is interested in redefining metrics of success for lifelong career readiness so that we're no longer necessarily using just a standardized test score or a letter grade or a GPA to define a person's worth, and using those as a bar to entry to further education or to the workforce. I'm pleased to be talking today with Scott Pulsipher, who is the president of WGU, Western Governors University, a private online nonprofit competency-based higher ed institution based in Salt Lake City that was founded in 1997 by 19 Western state governors. Full disclosure, WGU is partnering with CSG to support the work of the Future of Work Task Force, and we thank them for their great support. In addition to being the president of WGU, Scott is a member of the American Workforce Policy Advisory Board's Data Transparency Working Group, which last year released a white paper outlining the concept of something called an interoperable learning record, which some believe may be able to help enable lifelong learning and navigate a changing world of education and work in the years ahead. Scott, just in the week since we've been planning and setting up this interview, we've seen the world turned upside down by COVID-19. It has turned education upside down. It is turning the world of work upside down. And we're likely to see the ramifications of this for many months and years to come. So when I ask you this first question that I wrote a month ago, I recognize that it may have a somewhat different answer than it perhaps would have just a month ago. But what is an interoperable learning record? Why is it necessary? And to put things in context with our new normal, has anything about this crisis demonstrated to you in even greater detail the need for interoperable learning records going forward?
Well, thank you for that question, Sean, and you're correct. Thank you also for having me. You're correct in the sense that the context of that question now may be very different given just the rapid disruption that is occurring in our normal kind of daily lives and the routine that many are used to. And to get to the question, I think the simple way to think about an interoperable learning record is its universality, if you will. It's a way to really communicate an individual's skills between employers and workers and their education and training institutions. And it's really a mechanism by which an individual is able to kind of amass in their own mobile wallet all of the competencies and skills that they've acquired, all the credentials that have been associated with that learning, and regardless of where they've gained them, whether it was in an academic setting, like at a higher ed institution, or it could have been in prior military experience. It may also be in apprenticeships and even work. And the point of the interoperable learning record is to say that if the future language between individuals and employers and institutions is one of competency and skill, this is a way by which it can increase the understanding that exists between what an individual possesses and what an employer or the workforce needs. And it dramatically exposes, or if you will, broadens the view that an individual has around the opportunities that are available to them, because now those are understood in the context of the competencies and skills, rather than seeing only a line that says X degree required for this job or particular certifications required. It now allows the employers to also communicate effectively to individuals what really are the competencies and skills needed for these jobs. And so when you do that, an individual also, because of the interoperable learning record, has a much better visibility as to the pathways and opportunities they could pursue. And so let me stop there with just giving that as maybe a base answer to what really is then an interoperable learning record.
Yeah. So this is a concept that's being put forward and pushed by something called the American Workforce Policy Advisory Board and its Data Transparency Working Group, of which you are a member. But who are these folks involved with and supporting this effort?
Yeah, what we're seeing is that this Workforce Policy Advisory Board was brought together and co-chaired by the Secretary of Commerce, Wilbur Ross, and also Ivanka Trump, who is the special advisor to the president. It was formed really to bring together employers, institutions of higher education, associations, technology providers who are also employers, to really address some of the biggest challenges around how do we ready and upskill and really transform the capabilities and of our individuals that comprise the workforce for what the future of work is going to be. I think that we are recognizing today that, just to give some maybe quick statistics, like there are today 36 million American adults in the US who have some college and no degree. We see the gap also between the supply of credentialed workers and employer demand is also widening, meaning it's at 5 million and growing. We also recognize that rapidly emerging technologies or disruptive changes to the business model that the future of the work and the competencies needed are going to be different. And so even within the 160 million Americans that are in the workforce, a large portions of those are going to have to be, have to find pathways to develop the capabilities they need to be productive and pursue the opportunities of what that future work is going to look like. And so this is bringing together parties that include, governors. So we have both Governor Holcomb of the great state of Indiana, as well as we also have Kim Edwards from the governor of Iowa. We also have individuals like Jay Box, who's Kentucky Community and Technical College System, U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and Tom Donahue. We also have individuals like Doug McMillan, CEO of Walmart, and Tim Cook, CEO of Apple. We also have Jay Timmons, who's the CEO and president of the National Association of Manufacturers. And you can get a sense is that these individuals are representing states, they're representing employers, they're representing education, they're representing associations. And the goal is to really figure out what are those primary endeavors that we need to undertake to ready the workforce for the future. And so the key initiative areas were data transparency and the interoperable learning record. It is about advancing alternative pathways to opportunity. So it's not only through a traditional post-secondary education pathway. It is about improving the recruiting and hiring practices of employers for the future. It is also about advancing employer-provided training and work-based apprenticeships and things like that as a means by which we can really ready the American workforce for what we think the fourth industrial revolution will bring.
Yeah. The white paper that the working group put out last year speaks to three groups that are part of an interoperable learning record ecosystem, if you will, and that have overlapping interests and common challenges, but also unique requirements: issuers, learners, and consumers. How do those three groups intersect here?
Yeah, the way they intersect is that in some degree, if like the traditional providers of education, we've been primarily providing credentials in the sense that the only measure or the coin of the realm, if you will, was a bachelor's degree or some related association certification. That became an imperfect filter for employers to also look at these and recognize that describing jobs and requirements needed in an employee to fill that job was then written against that same thing, this credential needed. And then there are also technology providers that who were underpinning kind of these practices that we had from either the learning management systems on one side or the student lifecycle management on one side to also some of the dynamics in the hiring and recruiting practices. And so there's simply a recognition that if the future of work and the skills and competencies of the individuals needed to provide that work. If that is going to be the future, then the practices across this, learning to earning model have to advance to support that. But then it also requires the technology underpinnings to make that possible as well. And so, the whole notion of a student life cycle, when oriented around competencies and skills and enabling this interoperability, you then need to have the technology providers and players to also support that transformation that needs to exist at that institution of learning. The same has to be true for those who are interpreting those outcomes for an employee management system and a human capital management system that's an employer is utilizing to understand, are we attracting and recruiting the right talent? Are we investing in the development of the right skills and competencies for that talent? Are we identifying the pathways of opportunity, meaning the new jobs and promotional pathways that our employers need? And so this is that intersection that says you need to bring together learning providers and education providers, employers, as well as the technology. I just paused there because I just was watching the connection. I just paused. So let me restate that. So it brings together the ability to say employers and providers of learning that then have a technology underpinning to that allows us to communicate effectively. And so it also brings to bear the design at a technical and a data level to say, how does the system work? There are great analogies, by the way. You can think of the banking system in the US is that while there are all these different bank brands, there are regional ones, national ones, global ones, there are practices and processes related to payments and managing of that and the credit flow and the mortgage servicing business. Like all of these are practices that are done in unique and different ways to support the customers, the consumer at the end. But there is a common set of things by which those banks can interoperate and communicate in an effective and efficient manner, so that then when it comes to a system level, things work incredibly smoothly. We're hoping for that same dynamic to occur when we're talking about education to work.
Yeah. The white paper notes that making learner records interoperable requires standardization across 3 types of ontologies: occupations and job descriptions, skills and credentials. What kinds of initiatives are underway to create better apples to apples comparisons in those areas? Regular listeners of this interview series will recall we talked with the folks at Credential Engine some time back. But what are some of those other initiatives out there that are sort of helping to pave the way for this interoperability?
Yeah, I think there are good examples if you even break it down by industry. So, for example, just think about the healthcare industry. Is that in the allied health space, regardless of where the the healthcare provider is, whether it's a hospital system or a community health network, that there are accepted competencies and skills that are needed when it comes to providing for a certified medical coder, understanding and all the different diagnostic things that are ending up on an individual medical record, understanding then what are the skills and competencies for a medical assistant and a nurse itself, and how do you identify the skills and competencies that are needed related to a licensed vocational nurse. This is already a common set of language that healthcare employers are recognizing to truly certify the caliber of individuals that they have filling that role. The challenge then is how do you get a set of certified or an ability to certify those outcomes regardless of the learning pathway or the journey that the individual took. So in a state like California, where there's a very clear endeavor with Futuro Health and the labor union and 15 different healthcare employers, they're trying to figure out how, regardless of whether it's a community college providing it, WGU providing it, or other private providers of these pathways, that there are very clear competency and certification standards against that, such that when certified, these employers know that they're able to actually get the talent that they need to fill the very large number of jobs they have in allied health. A similar example you can look to in technology, where cloud computing is the basis for the future of computing and the utility computing that exists out there. There are a growing number of certifications that exist to say these are the skill sets and competencies needed for a cloud architect, or these are the ones that are needed for cybersecurity. That you can look at examples like CompTIA certifications or NSA even certifications, that those certifications become part of validating that the individual has demonstrated proficiency or mastery of those specific competency. So again, regardless of where you're actually acquiring your learning, you can be certified to possess the competencies that employers need. And you can see an increasing number of these across a variety of different sectors, including finance and financial related roles and endeavors. And so this is why the benefit we also have of the associations being involved, and where a National Association of Manufacturers, and you think about all the ISO standards that exist there. So that work is happening, and it's really about getting it more integrated then into the learning record, so that regardless of the pathway the individual pursues, they can truly show within their learning record to the marketplace that I have demonstrated proficiency in those competencies that you need. So this is we see this happening in a lot of different sectors, and it's really increasing then the alignment between learning pathways and future of work.
Yeah. So what are the challenges and barriers that stand in the way to sort of widespread adoption of interoperable learning records? And is there a state policy agenda when it comes to helping to remove those barriers? Are there changes in law that need to happen, changes in policy, existing initiatives that states can support to help move that needle?
Yeah, as you might imagine, one of the major challenges, just the sheer number of players in the space. I mean, there are over 5,000 institutions of higher education in the U.S. I think the total number of, I think we have 5 million employers in the U.S. We have 160 million people in the workforce. We are talking about very large numbers, and that is one of the major challenges. Is how do you really advance the acceptance and then the adoption of a proposed set of open standards and protocols that will increase the effectiveness of that flow between what you asked about before, between issuers of the learning, the learners relying on those issuers, and then consumers of those being employers. Like, how do you really get that large volume of individuals to kind of accept, commit to, and increase their adoption of these things? I think the other key challenge, and this is why this working group is focused on this, is having the sound data infrastructure and the common protocols or definitions implemented into that platform. And so this is where some of the work is very specifically focused on what is the taxonomy for competencies related to these different work domains. What are the accepted credentials or badges? This is, you mentioned a credential engine. Like, what are the protocols for those designs so that they're easily understood by all the different consumers of those badges? What are even the pathways that exist between learning and opportunities, and so that the owner of that record can understand, when I'm acquiring these competencies, what are the pathways and opportunities I can see? And so that data infrastructure is not a small undertaking. That is one of the challenges to ensuring the widespread adoption. So with maybe that as just a preface, I'll highlight maybe 3 thoughts around a state policy agenda and what it might look like, or a policy agenda broadly. This isn't only state. So one is, at a federal or national level, there really do have to be incentives in place for states to adopt these open skills protocols. And this is something that specifically the American Workforce Policy Advisory Board is advocating and championing for. Then the effort has to then shift to the state level. And so how do states and relevant associations really then work to drive adoption of those open skills commitments, so that that skill and competency data becomes highly usable by state departments of labor, by the workforce agencies, by the employers that are supported within those states, and it increases the awareness of this. This is one of those cases where that you can see some of this happening at specific at state levels. This is why Kim Reynolds being on that board and Governor Holcomb being on the board from the great state of Indiana, that they are individuals who are representing at their state level, that they are committing to this kind of workforce model in the future. And lastly, I would just say that states should be exploring how to use or incorporate the open skill data throughout their state managed employment and business services. Like, they are very large employers in their states, and these can be great proving grounds of how this open architecture of skills and competencies that are worked into the definition of the jobs, so that then learners who are acquiring those competencies can have a better understanding as to what pathways are available, and the hiring and recruiting of the individuals can also commit to a model that is based upon what a person possesses as skill and competency rather than only the credentials they hold.
Yeah.
So those are just some initial thoughts in this regard.
Yeah. So what does that ideal world look like? What can be the benefits of widespread adoption of ILRs writ large?
Well, I think the large scale benefit is that we move into a model where there is in fact a common language that's existing between let me maybe step back a little bit and go back to this model of, if everything is centered around an individual who wants to pursue a lifetime of progress, then the major benefit to this is that they have a greater understanding of what are the alternative pathways I could pursue to acquire the competencies that are needed within the pathway that I have a passion for, such that they are much more effectively enabled to make decisions about whether it's this college pathway or this apprenticeship model or this paid internship, whatever it is like, which is the best pathway, meaning best in terms of it helps me develop the right competencies needed for the opportunity I want to pursue. It meets my affordability requirements, etc. It's designed for an individual who learns like me and meets my particular characteristics as an individual. That it better enables them to make choices there with the same level of confidence that, having completed that pathway, I'm going to then possess the skills that are validated and certified to all then the employers that I need to engage with on that opportunity pathway I'm pursuing. That there will not be any questions from those employers about, did you really acquire this learning? Trying to understand, whether or not the courses I took or the apprenticeship I did or whatever, whether it was something that met their standard, because I now as an individual possess a certified record that I have demonstrated mastery and proficiency against the competency that you as an employer have said are critical for this opportunity. And that now gives this level of confidence that says I as the individual have more focus on the competencies I possess rather than how I acquired them. That really focuses then on that rather than the how. It focuses on the competency that I demonstrate versus how I acquired it. That is, I think, highlighted by the likes of Milton Friedman and others. Like, the future of work is about what you know and what you have acquired, not about how you acquired it. And that's the writ large. It really means that employers are much more enabled and confident that they can, advance the skill and capability of their workforce. The individuals are much more confident in their ability to define a self-determined pathway in their life. The institutions and all the national and state level budget and regulatory support that they give to institutions of learning know that they're going to get an outcome for that investment that they're making, that really increases the education to work link and alignment that needs to exist for our future.
Mm-hmm. So you're the president of WGU, which we know has a somewhat unique model and mission. How can interoperable learning records help your university serve its student population and fulfill its mission?
Yeah, that's a great question. One thing that WGU has a competency-based pedagogical model. We are a little bit more ready, I think, if you will, for this future of interoperable learning records and a blockchain-enabled, learning wallet, if you will. And so one of the things, though, that this significantly increases our capacity in serving our students is we can provide a real-time value insight index, if you will, to a student. So rather than waiting until the completion and the attainment of a bachelor's degree to then start thinking about jobs to pursue, with each course that you're completing and having defined the competencies that are part of the outcome, the learning outcomes of that course completion, we can provide real-time information as to the relevance and the marketability of those competencies into the workforce because of partnerships with an MC, because of the interoperable learning record that defines those competencies and connects them to the real world of work. So as a student's actually progressing through their program, they're actually seeing the value of what they're gaining because of the opportunities they're presented in the broader marketplace. They're not having to, if you will, slog through a long process that then the payoff only comes at the end. They're actually being able to see that in real time as they're progressing through it. We know that the efficacy of doing so, it increases the propensity of a student to persist, to demonstrate the resiliency needed to continue to advance and stack on top of the competencies that they're acquiring as they go course by course. We also see one other major benefit as you do this, that in fact, a future of sub-degree and degree credentials in this stackable micro-credential world of the future, that now becomes much more possible. That individuals who need to be upskilled and reskilled, or even first opportunity. So let me rephrase that. Maybe the way to think about it is it's no longer just about the first opportunity. It's also about the next opportunity, that we can design a future learning model that at this interoperable learning record level allows us to say, here is a smaller micro-credential that you can come and pursue because it packages the competencies needed for you to advance in this particular career field. But it doesn't require a full bachelor's. But having acquired that, you can come back and not start back at zero, but rather stack on new competencies by acquiring the next credential. And if you think about this analogy, it's rather than only trading in dollars, it actually allows us to also trade in quarters and dimes, if you will. That there are relevant opportunities that exist for individuals out there that you can acquire with maybe less cost and in shorter time, but having a high degree of relevancy to the jobs that you want to pursue. And you don't have to worry about having to start over again when you want to pursue the next credential. That it really allows us, WGU as an institution, to advance the future around stackable micro-credentials that can lead to a bachelor's degree for sure, but that may not be in the conventional four-year model. It may see many pursued over 10 years, and the whole time along the way, they're acquiring the credentials that enable opportunities. They can stack on those credentials, and they can do that over a lifetime rather than just a pure one and done model.
Yeah. So are the more traditional brick and mortar four-year higher ed institutions equally supportive of this concept, or have they been harder to bring along?
I think it really just varies. I think those, not surprisingly, those who are actually facing forward and looking at what are those trends and pressures, they're shaping that education to work alignment that needs to exist. If they're looking at that, you're seeing a lot of engagement, investments, innovation endeavors, and commitments to advancing kind of the units of measure to include competencies and skills so that they can enable this interoperability. And I think it does force consideration of what their value offering or their value proposition is going to look like in the future. And it means that they have to some degree cede some control over certain aspects because it increases the value of the credentials that they're providing or the learning that they're delivering in the first place. But it does mean that they have to subscribe to a model that says, we want to make these, the credentials that we're affording our students, we want to make them better understood. We want to increase their alignment with employers. We want to increase the quality and relevancy and reputation of the credentials that our students are going to possess. And so though we do see generally that there's an increasing interest in how the future of education is better aligned with the future of work. And so we'll see that, I think, accelerate into the future. At least that's our hope.
Yeah. Well, Scott, I want to thank you for joining us today and providing your perspective, which will help greatly to inform the work of our subcommittee and task force. Best of luck with the efforts to develop interoperable learning records, and thanks again to you and WGU for your support of the CSG Future of Work Task Force. Please stay safe and stay healthy to you and the folks at WGU and all those who may have the opportunity to listen to this interview. For CSG, I'm Sean Sloan in Lexington. Thanks for listening.